Technically, Shawn does have brain damage, and that's the cause of the post-concussive syndrome. With Shawn's current neurological status, any additional blows to the head could be life-threatening.
You know what? It seems to me people have been dodging me around here lately.
I don't dodge anybody.
So this is the way it's gonna be, huh?
If it's gotta be, it has to be.
It must be easy for you to sit there. But for me, to respond to a question like that, this is not a job, this is my livelihood. This is my life. This means more to me than just about anything I could ever possibly dream of. It's all the same to you. I'm not going to dignify that question with a response.
Hello, my name is Bob Bamber and welcome to the Wrestling 20 Years Ago podcast. We're going back in the time machine to December of 1995 for Volume 2 of this month's show. You've got 6 volumes this month in order. It's WCW, WWF, ECW, UFC, the End of Year Review Show and the End of Year Awards. So you've got plenty of audio to get yourself through. We're here in Volume 2 for WWF. I'm being joined by Chris White. Chris, hello.
Bob, how you doing?
I'm very well. And Craig Wilson.
Season's greetings, or should that be season's beatings?
Thank you, Craig. Craig, kick us off with the news.
It seems that the WWF have changed course when it comes to the levels of violence on their programming. Bret Hart and the British Bulldog wrestled in the main event of In Your House 5, which included a spot where Bret bladed. Earlier in the show, Jeff Jarrett and Ahmed Johnson had quite a violent brawl, which included Jarrett hitting him multiple times with a steel chair. And 24 hours later on Nitro, Hulk Hogan went nuts wielding a steel chair. It would be folly to think that this was a coincidence.
Outside of Bret retaining his title against Bulldog, In Your House 5 was a fairly uneventful show, but still one of the company's better offerings in 1995. Jeff Jarrett returned after departing in July, attacking Ahmed Johnson after he had defeated Buddy Landel. There were also wins for Razor Ramon and Marty Jannetty, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Owen Hart by DQ over Diesel, and The Undertaker. The show closed with The Undertaker and Diesel having a standoff. Undertaker will face Bret Hart for the WWF title at the Royal Rumble.
The WWF got as far as sending the Ultimate Warrior a plane ticket and even mentioning him by name on Superstars, but all of that is on hold. Both parties are talking and the company wanted to fly him in to shoot some interviews ahead of a return in time for the Royal Rumble. It is believed talks are ongoing with a decent chance of him coming in, but after the pre-recorded comments on Superstars, he wasn't mentioned again on television. And some people in the locker room are questioning the motivation, given how much the Warrior would cost, his attitude, and also whether he could pass WWF's new stringent drug testing policies.
Now former WWF Women's Champion Alundra Blaze, aka Deborah Miceli, turned up on WCW Monday Nitro and then dropped the belt into a bin live on television. Her contract expired on December 13th, with the company opting not to review it before telling All Japan that they were cancelling the match between Blaze and Aja Kong at the Royal Rumble. Clearly though, nobody bothered to get the belt back off her. She appeared on Nitro 5 days later saying, "This is where the big girls play," and is now going by the name Medusa. We have covered this story in detail on the WCW volume this month.
Shane Douglas is reportedly on the way out of the company, with stories about him being done, although his contract may not formally expire until February. Amongst other issues recently, including him coughing up blood at In Your House 4, Douglas has been diagnosed with a fractured vertebrae and a bulging disc. That hasn't stopped some questioning his motives, with Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon confronting him backstage, believing he was faking the injury at an MSG house show so that his character had the reason for losing to Ramon. And Douglas is scheduled to face Ahmed Johnson at the pay-per-view, but instead he introduced his graduate student, Ric Flair knockoff Buddy Landel.
The company have contacted a number of names about appearing in the Royal Rumble next month, including Vader, Terry Funk, and Ultimate Fighter Dan Severn. Funk has already said no, and Severn's participation seems unlikely given his recent success in the UFC, which you can listen to in Volume 4 of this month's show. Vader could also appear, but is scheduled for surgery on his shoulder, so that does seem unlikely also. Two names that are likely to appear are Jake the Snake Roberts and Rick Martel.
December 9th saw the conclusion of a 17-day house show loop, the longest for the company this year. After winning the title back, Bret Hart was actually booed during many of the dates defending against The Undertaker. This forced them to change the finish in some markets, and further still was reports of Diesel getting cheered when attacking Bret after the matches had concluded.
Vince McMahon did an interview this month touching on a number of topics. He said that he wouldn't mind being the first to blink when it came to potentially moving the time slot of Raw to another evening if it benefited wrestling fans. He was asked about whether WWF would get more hardcore in 1996, and he said, "It depends on what you mean by hardcore. There is likely to be a bit more of an aggressive style." He also said that WWF's new website will be live around WrestleMania season, no doubt to be copied, however, by an inferior wrestling organisation coupled with an inferior online service.
The WWF received a number of complaints following the Survivor Series main event last month regarding usage of chairs and Diesel swearing after the match. It said the company want a rougher product but don't want to alienate sponsors. And finally, after losing out on the ECW title, Steve Austin debuted at TV taping this month as the Ringmaster, managed by Ted DiBiase.
Well done, boys, for, I think, the longest ever news segment we've ever done. We're actually going to strap a bit more onto that as well with me introducing a news segment looking at the ratings from each month. We are going to end up essentially doing this on the same bit on WCW and WWF, so you probably would have heard this twice already. But November the 27th saw Raw post a 2.4 against Nitro's 2.3. December 4th saw Nitro post a 2.6, headlined by Randy Savage against Lex Luger over Raw's 2.4. December 11th, Nitro posted a 2.6 against Raw's 2.5. December 18th, Nitro posted a 2.7 against 2.4, which was the night WWF were coming off of their pay-per-view. And on Christmas Day, there was no Raw episode, at least not in the United States. We're gonna review what aired over here. And we don't have the number for Nitro yet, so we'll cover that in January. One thing that WCW have moved in their favour is the use of an overrun. Every Nitro this month has been almost an hour, even if you take out commercial breaks. They're running well into the 10 o'clock hour anyway. On December the 4th, they picked up a 0.2 hike in the overrun, which was enough to tip the ratings in their favour.
Shawn Michaels collapsed to the canvas, and we later found out Shawn was suffering from post-concussion syndrome.
In the United States annually, there's about 4 million patients that suffer from some type of head trauma. As a result of the head trauma, about half these patients develop a syndrome, which includes problems such as ringing the ears, nausea, vomiting, headache, blurred vision, different problems such as numbness in their hands and feet, forgetfulness, inability to concentrate. They can lose their direction, and this becomes a problem because these patients tend to get frustrated. They get depressed as well. They have sleep disturbances, and all this persists for between 2 weeks to several months. However, there's a group of patients that may go up to 3 years before they show any improvement, and these patients usually have a very poor prognosis, and they don't seem to get better at all.
I asked the doctor about Shawn's current test results.
Shawn's current neurological tests are abnormal, and I believe that he might be out considerably longer than I expected. Any indication of having Shawn return at this time to the WWF are just totally premature.
I then asked the doctor when we could expect to see Shawn Michaels back in action.
I'm not sure when Shawn's going to come back. I do know that there are many professional football players and boxers that never fully recover from these type of head injuries. With Shawn, the problem is that he is such a high-impact type of athlete that I would have to be 100% certain that he would not re-injure himself when he got back into the ring. Shawn's wrestling career is absolutely insignificant to me. I am concerned about Shawn as a human being. Technically, Shawn does have brain damage, and that's the cause of the post-concussive syndrome. With Shawn's current neurological status, any additional blows to the head could be life-threatening.
We open up Raw on December 4th with a competitive and decent match between the British Bulldog and Bob Holly. Bulldog wins clean with a running power slam. We cut to Superstars from the 2nd of December. We see Bob Backlund put the cross-face chicken wing on Jim Ross. Back on Raw, Lawler interviews Backlund in the crowd. Backlund says he's had dreams of being God again. He's not happy about his match with Bret Hart next meeting being a non-title match. Backlund rants for so long, we go to a commercial break. We let a cut to Bob Backlund by the sound booth. Backlund, unhappy at his mic being cut, puts the sound engineer in a chicken wing. Razor Ramon defeats Dean Douglas with the Razor's Edge in a good Raw match. Another painful segment with Brother Love, this time with King Mabel. Brother Love unveils the double-wide, double-deep casket that Mabel Undertaker will face off in your house. The casket is being pushed out by a druid who turns out to be Sir Mo. They're graffitied all over the casket. They're advertising the Raw Bowl for January 1st. The 1-2-3 Kid interferes in the main event between Sid and Marty Jannetty. Razor makes the saves and clears house before chasing the Kid deep into the crowd. Back in the ring, Sid powerbombs Jannetty for good measure. We get comments from Shawn Michaels' doctor. He recounts watching Shawn collapse on Raw. He says Shawn may not ever return to the ring. They fill in clips of Shawn's year before turning in a bizarre montage of Vince McMahon attempting to humanise his top stars, saying we tend to put them on a pedestal. Owen Hart defeats Jeff Hardy on the December 11th Raw. Diana Smith was sat in the crowd for that match. After the match, Yokozuna does the bonsai drop on Hardy. Owen Hart puts the sharpshooter on him, outruns Diesel and runs off Owen before showing some electric offense to deal with Yokozuna. He showed more speed and fire here than in his entire time he was champion, and also suggested that him against Yokozuna may not have been the snooze fest that we perhaps first thought. Aja Kong faces Chaparita Asari. Kong dominates and twice pulls out the pin attempt. Asari misses a corkscrew moonsault. Kong hits her discus chop, and that's enough for the win. Shawn Michaels sits down with Todd Pettengill, presumably the company thought he hadn't suffered enough already. Shawn thanks the fans for their response. He says he still has some goals left to achieve in his career and wants to see those goals through. Shawn tears up when Pettengill brings up the possibility of retirement and is offended that Pettengill would even ask. Ahmed Johnson cuts the promo after winning a squash. He says he isn't scared of Dean Douglas. In fact, he wants to know where Douglas even is. Doc Hendricks is shilling WWF denim jackets for just $60. You can buy either the Shawn jacket, the Bret jacket, the Undertaker jacket, or the Diesel jacket. We get an in-ring interview with Ted DiBiase, Sid and the Kid. The Kid isn't worried about the fans anymore. He's just focused on himself and money. Sid says they are family. During the main event of Bret Hart vs Bob Backlund, we join Jerry Lawler in the crowd with Diana Smith. Bret and Backlund have an old school type match with Backlund dominating the middle stages with a lot of ground work. Bulldog distracts Bret. Backlund puts Bret in the chicken wing and Bulldog unloads on him. It takes a number of officials to get Backlund off of Hart.
The charismatic, the flamboyant, the one and only Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. Man, this is so cool. Thank you for
very
doing
much,
this.
Todd. Sounds to me like you I've been reading my press and believing it too, which is not bad. It's what I do. So by all means, continue.
All right, Shawn, let me get right into it and ask you certainly a question that all the fans of the World Wrestling Federation want me to ask you, and that's how you're doing physically. The outpouring, their concern has been unbelievable, really overwhelming. Since you collapsed in the ring on Raw, everybody wants to know just one thing. And I guess I want to hear it from your lips. How are you feeling physically?
Well, Todd, first of all, I would like to take this opportunity to tell the fans of the World Wrestling Federation, thank you. Thank you very much for their outpouring of concern for me. The response from the fans of the World Wrestling Federation has been unbelievable, and I want them all to know that Shawn Michaels, as a man, as a person, as a superstar, however it is you look at him, it means a great deal to him. Thank you very much.
How about physically, Shawn, your condition? How are you?
I think I'm okay. I'm not suffering from any of these symptoms that my doctors and everyone else claims that I have. I haven't had any dizziness or any blackouts lately, right. And so to me, I feel fine.
Well, would it surprise you to know that a lot of people are talking about you out there?
No. About me?
I'm talking about the locker rooms, the internet, I mean all over the place, the innuendo, the speculation. Let's not deal with it specifically. Let's just center on one thing. When are you coming back? That's what everybody wants to know. When is Shawn Michaels going to return?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I would return today. But there are some doctors and some people in higher places that don't agree with me, which is not uncommon for me. So it's just a matter of me doing what I always do, and that's ignoring all the authority and just doing what I want to do. So. Right. Before long, I hope to be back in the ring very soon.
You know, you said I was reading your own press and believing it, but seriously, I mean, it's got to be cool to be you. Intercontinental champion a number of times, tag team champion a number of times. I mean, you weren't WWF champion, but, I mean, you've had an awesome career.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have. There are some goals left to be attained by Shawn Michaels. Everyone knows what those goals are. And if it's all the same to everyone else, I'd like to stick around and see those goals through.
Well, that being said, isn't that kind of in jeopardy? I mean, with the information that your doctor has given us about your physical condition, I mean, you've got to be facing what every athlete faces at some point in their career, and that being possible retirement.
Is that what all this is for? Is that what all this is about? The lights, the camera? It's not about your concern for me, obviously. It's about you getting my reaction to that question on your camera, isn't it? It must be easy for you to sit there. But for me, to respond to a question like that, this is not a job. This is my livelihood. This is my life. This means more to me than just about anything I could ever possibly dream of. It's all the same to you. I'm not going to dignify that question with a response.
And we will jump into In Your House 5. Craig, you can kick us off with the results.
Certainly. In the dark match, Savio Vega defeated Bob Backlund. On the main show, Razor Ramon and Marty Jannetty defeated the team of the 1-2-3 Kid and Psycho Sid with Ted DiBiase in their corner in just over 12 minutes. Ahmed Johnson then defeated Buddy Landell, who was subbing for Dean Douglas, in 45 seconds. Hunter Hearst Helmsley defeated Henry O. Godwin in an Arkansas hog pen match with Hillbilly Jim as the special guest referee. The victor was the first man to toss his opponent into the hog pen. Then Owen Hart with Jim Cornette defeated Diesel by disqualification in just under 5 minutes. The Undertaker with Paul Bearer bested King Mabel with Sir Mo in a casket match in just over 6 minutes. And in the main event and longest match of the show, Bret Hart retained his WWF title against the British Bulldog in 21 minutes via pinfall. And after the main event, there was two further dark matches. Goldust defeating Duke the Dumpster Droese, and the Smoking Guns, Hakushi and Barry Horowitz defeating the Body Donnas, Yokozuna and Isaac Yankem DDS.
And perhaps the more important note, but other than the dark matches closing the show, was the final segment on the pay-per-view, where we had a standoff backstage between Diesel and The Undertaker. Chris, what do you think of this show?
It was a very mixed show. There was some very missable parts, very forgettable parts, but the main event was largely outstanding. But as good as that was, there was also a few matches that were just, quite frankly, terrible. The Undertaker match, Undertaker and Mabel, I mean, they've been paired together before. There's only so much you can get out of those two working together, and having had the pairing before, 6 minutes felt like a drag. It was such a, it was just a drag to sit through. It really wasn't enjoyable at all. But generally, I enjoyed the show. There were a few, like the Arkansas hog pen match, the gimmick being slightly ridiculous, but generally it was quite fun. It was enjoyable to watch. So it was a positive show for me. It was one of the better WWF shows I've seen this year. But it wasn't stellar by any means.
Craig?
You could probably just get away with watching the first match and the last match and leaving the rest. I appreciate Chris is quite fond of the hog pen match, but I just thought it was a little bit too kooky, and just a little bit obvious, I guess. But the opening match I thought was really good, except maybe when Sid was in the ring. But yeah, the main event was absolutely stellar. A great match. Maybe not quite on par with their 92 SummerSlam match, but still very good.
Yeah, a weird show in that it was very short. It was about an hour and 40 minutes, I think, which I think even by In Your House standards is cutting it. The opening, everything bar the main event, was short enough to the point where it couldn't be good, but equally short enough to the point where nothing ever really got a chance to be that horrendous, and it went by quite quickly. It didn't achieve a lot, but the main event was excellent. All in all, one of the better WWF shows this year, in the sense that they cleared a lot of stuff early on and then gave Bret and Bulldog enough time to go up there and have a really good main event. We will break down the show as we get to it. We open with a video package saying it might as well be season's beatings in the Hart family. Santa is giving out Christmas gifts along with the smoking guns. Yes, that's what being WWF Tag Team Champions gets you. And no, they did not appear at any point on this show. We cut to a wide angle when 1-2-3 Kid and Sid Vicious walk out, and illuminated away from the ring is the hog pen that we use later in the show. Yes, they've literally taken out a bunch of very valuable floor seats and replaced them with a pig pen. And there are actual real pigs already in the pen. We open up with Sid and the Kid, the 1-2-3 Kid, and Sid with Ted DiBiase versus Razor Ramon and Marty Jannetty. We see Goldust sat in the crowd on IVR way when Razor and Jannetty walk out. Goldust has some kind of golden sofa to sit on. Jannetty gets it an enziguri on the Kid for a 2. Jannetty blocks the rocker dropper before leveling the Kid with a right, then an atomic drop. Razor gets the tag for a big crowd pop. Razor and the Kid exchange punches. Razor slaps him. Sid gets a blind tag and levels Razor for some big boos. The Kid and Sid crowd Razor in their corner, both taking the opportunity to get some shots in. Razor gets fired off the ropes and he and Sid both hit the mat going for a clothesline. The Kid charges at Jannetty but runs into some a nice scoop slam. Jannetty then hits a neck breaker from the second rope. Todd Pettengill joins Goldust. Goldust asks Todd if he's here for an affair. He asks Pettengill to give Razor a golden envelope. Very weird segment. Jannetty flies off the top. Sid catches him into a slam for a 2. Sid then goes after Razor, but Jannetty nearly rolls him off the distraction. Kid hits a splash from the top for a 2. Kid drop kicks Marty. Then Sid hits a clothesline that flips Marty inside out. Marty's in a lot of trouble here. Finally, the Kid charges Jannetty in the corner, who moves. He gets a hot tag to Razor. Razor hits fall-away slam on the Kid, then sets for a Razor's Edge, which Sid which the crowd go nuts for. Sid counters into a back body drop. Razor hits the Bulldog from the second rope on Sid, and that's enough for the win. After the match, Razor sets Kid for the Razor's Edge, but Sid pulls him off, and the heels hightail it up the aisle. Craig, what do you think of this?
I thought this was a perfectly acceptable opening match. I particularly liked the moments when the 1-2-3 Kid and Marty Jannetty were in. I thought those were some excellent moments here. I mean, it's very sort of lower card stuff, but no, it was good. I think the idea of Marty and the 1-2-3 Kid working a lot together would probably benefit the 1-2-3 Kid with Marty's experience in the ring. I thought the stuff with Razor was pretty good. I'm just not a fan of Sid, so I didn't really enjoy much of his participation. I find it sort of slowed things down a little bit, but as openers go, I thought it was good. And it sort of keeps that programme with the 1-2-3 Kid and Razor going, which means that at least 1-2-3 Kid's got something to do.
Chris?
Yeah, I enjoyed this match as well. On paper, I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. I thought Jannetty got a good reaction from the crowd, which was a positive thing for my sort of reaction to how the match played out. I thought he played his role as sort of the babyface in peril really well. And equally, I thought the 1-2-3 Kid was in his sort of cowardly heel role in the way he goaded Razor and whatnot throughout the match and avoiding the Razor's Edge at the end. I thought he played his sort of cowardly heel role very well. And this match was around 11-12 minutes long. It didn't feel that long at all. I thought this was pretty good.
Yeah, to a point, a paint by numbers WWF tag team match, but a lot of them are like that, both good and bad. 4 guys that the crowd at least recognise, and I think to a point they're invested in them to one degree or another, even Jannetty and Sid. The action was good, they built up, heat on the heels and, for the hot babyface tag. And Craig, I was a little bit surprised because I just assumed that someone was going to pin Marty Jannetty, so I was somewhat surprised that Razor picked up the win, but pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. When you looked at the match on paper, it was quite obvious that it was going to be Marty taking the pin, but I guess it sort of keeps us on our toes. And to sort of reiterate a point Chris made, the heel turn for the 1-2-3 Kids made him far more interesting. I know that's something we've hit on in previous podcasts as well, but it really is light or day between how bland he was at the end of his sort of babyface run and how interesting the fans are, and particularly us, are in his character.
Craig, would you turn the Kid over turning Razor? When they were both baby faces, you turn one of them, as much as the Kid improves, wouldn't Razor improve more?
Probably, but Razor would have been a much bigger loss to the babyface side of things, and it's not as sort of loaded as you'd expect, and I think the 1-2-3 Kid was much staler in that. I think there's an element of staleness in Razor Ramon's character, but not quite at the dearth of interest that the 1-2-3 Kid was at.
Chris, same question?
Yeah, I could see turning Razor heel rather than the Kid. I think if with the title now on Bret, a heel Razor versus Bret would be a match that you could have somewhere down the line with these more regular pay-per-views they have now. But again, as Craig said, I think the Kid's less of a loss to the babyface side of things, and he's done quite well in his role so far for me. So, although it's a work in progress, I think maybe it's not the outright correct decision, but I don't necessarily think it's a bad one.
I kind of think in a parallel universe, the main event of tonight's show is a babyface Bret Hart against a heel Razor Ramon. I perhaps phrased my question a minute ago incorrectly when I said Razor would improve more. I think I don't know if that's the case. I just think Razor as a main event heel would be worth a lot more than the 1-2-3 Kid would be as a mid-card heel. But no, I would agree with the wider sentiment that you turn the Kid, you make him more valuable, in that they don't really have enough convincing heels where he can play off someone as quite a cookie cutter babyface. I think at least this way you've got a bit more dimension to him. Anyway, Jerry Lawler gets in the ring. He's got a gift for someone, and he's got a special guest. It's Double J Jeff Jarrett. Craig, thoughts on this?
It's quite remarkable how many chances Jeff Jarrett gets, because we discussed previously that how many times can you burn your bridges, but he just keeps on getting back. I suspect it's more to do with the influence of his father than any deemed in-ring talent, but yep, he's got some bounce back ability, has Double J.
Certainly does. Lawler says Jarrett has been preparing for his world tour, and the gift he has is a gold CD celebrating 500,000 copies sold of the Ain't I Great album. Jarrett says he single-handedly took Raw to places it has never been before, which isn't entirely untrue given that him and Undertaker was one of the highest rated Raw segments of the year. Jarrett then says he is, quote, the very first participant in the 1996 Royal Rumble. Laura invites Jarrett onto commentary for the night, it seems. Chris, what do you think of this segment?
I mean, it was a pretty good way to introduce Jarrett, and again, it's rather than just airing a vignette hyping the Royal Rumble next month, to have someone on the pay-per-view before come out and declare their entrant, and it be someone who's they're building up as not a massive return, but a fairly notable return to the roster. So to have him come back and announce his intention to enter the Royal Rumble is a good way to promote the pay-per-view. If anything, that's what I would take away from it, rather than any sort of impact that Double J is going to have in the coming months.
Yeah, he's going to be involved in something quite big in the next 15 minutes, so we'll come to that in a sec. But I thought this is the kind of thing that should be saved for a pay-per-view, in that Jarrett's not a big enough name to move any numbers. He promoted his debut on Raw, I don't think, or his reintroduction rather. So you bring him back in. It's a nice little short angle. It previews the Royal Rumble as well, which is another positive. And as we'll come to in a second, he ends up being involved in quite a big angle because he stays out there for commentary. Dean Douglas is out next. He's struggling with a very legitimate back injury, which he's also selling. Douglas says he's been sidelined, claiming his back is at 65% of what it should be. Douglas introduces his, quote, graduate student, Buddy Landel, who is a Nature Boy Ric Flair knockoff, and they're even using Flair's old WWF music. So it's Buddy Landel with Dean Douglas versus Ahmed Johnson. Landell tries some chops. Johnson hits a spine buster from the top before hitting a Tiger Bomb for the quick 3 in probably the shortest match review I've ever done. Chris?
This went way over my head. I didn't really understand why there was this Ric Flair knockoff on the screen. They're just sort of firing some shots over to WCW, I guess. But, I mean, the match there's nothing worth commenting on. And it just went way over my head. And it was kind of like, well, we could probably just done without that being on the show, really. I didn't I didn't gain anything from it. I didn't find it amusing. Just nothing in it for me at all.
Craig, any info on the Buddy Landell thing? I'm kind of drawing blanks.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't seem to make sense. It does have that sort of feel of an in joke, and that's what I thought it was. But then previously, when there's those in jokes with the WWF that goes over everyone's head, Vince at least explains it. There was no explanation given for this, and it seemed really bizarre because, as we discussed at the start, we're talking about how sort of light the WWF are and how they're trying to get different guys to come in for the Rumble, and then you've got this guy. I'm not saying that Buddy Landell's a main eventer, but he's a decent enough, solid sort of worker that you could probably do something with if you wanted to, and they bring him in and squash him in 45 seconds. It's just bizarre. Utterly bizarre.
Yeah. Won't add any more to that. After the match, Johnson hits Douglas with his paddle. Lawler reluctantly interviews Johnson after the match. Lawler wants the camera to get his good side. He then asks Jarrett if he was impressed by Johnson, who says he wasn't. Lawler goes Johnson one too many times. Johnson calls Jarrett an achy, breaky, Hart wannabe. Johnson turns his back and Jarrett nails him with the framed CD. Jarrett then rams Johnson's head into the chair, which Lawler is holding, for hitting him across the back and on the head with it. He then rams Johnson into the steel steps. Jarrett keeps attacking Johnson, who preposterously just starts no-selling it. Jarrett legs it up the aisleway and they brawl into the back. Craig, I believe there was a missed time. It might be non-existent. There was meant to be people running out from the back to break these up. It doesn't appear like they got there in time. But I don't know that the best way out of that, if you're Ahmed Johnson, is just to randomly pop up after you've taken about 6 quite brutal looking shots, certainly by WWF standards at the moment, and then start fighting as if nothing happened.
Yeah, this was just such a rubbish segment. I appreciate that the WWF clearly expect us to care a little bit more about both guys, but you're right. The idea of Ahmed getting battered over the head a few times with a gold record and then just popping straight back up and chasing someone down the aisle just looks rubbish.
And Chris, I think had it have, let's say, gone to plan, because I don't know that if the plan was a pull apart, I don't know that was a good idea, because Jarrett was way on top. But had they have just left Johnson laying there by the ring steps, I think this would have been a very effective segment.
It would have been much better if, as you say, if it had left him laying there and he'd have made his escape sort of in a more arrogant way. You'd have got a lot more out of the segment, a lot more. It would have done a lot more for Jarrett on his return. And probably done a lot more for Ahmed Johnson, who sort of didn't come off looking too well. I know it didn't go to plan, but generally this was a detriment to both guys rather than doing anything for the both of them. And
Craig as well, I won't say a return to a more violent style. That would be presuming too many things about what we might see in the coming months. But a jarringly weapon-based segment for a company that about 18 months ago live on Monday Night Raw had Duke Droese go to hit Jerry Lawler with a garbage can and then pan to a wide-angle shot because they didn't want to show it. This is quite the turn.
It's undoubtedly edgier, certainly. Be interesting to see if this is just the start of a longer journey. But yeah, it's a very noticeable change in direction from the WWF.
Pettengill is backstage with Razor Ramon. He gives him the letter from Goldust. It looks like a poem of sorts when kind of we briefly see it. Razor starts reading it, looks confused, screws up the paper, and throws it away. Craig, your quick thoughts on this Goldust stuff? It's they're basically implying he's gay. There's a line from Razor saying on Raw, I'd have to dig it out, basically, I don't care what you're into, but I'm not into that. It's different. If we're talking about them being edgier from a weapons and violence based standpoint, this is edgier in a whole different direction. The jury's out on whether it'll work, but I'm more intrigued by Goldust than I was when he was being a bit fat wrestling Marty Jannetty a couple of months ago.
Yes, I'd certainly agree with that. Again, as you say, it is edgier. I can only assume, though, that the WWF are going to probably be quite offensive with this and get it wildly wrong, or don't be brave enough and it comes across being quite flat and nothing. I think those are the sort of only two possible outcomes from this one for me.
Yeah, there is a very fine zone right in the middle of what you said there, which is them getting it right. And I think a lot of past history tells us they will fall either to the right or to the left. But yeah, again, I don't know whether, it's not like this is a dramatic change of direction. This doesn't feel that out of keeping with the Goldust character, but they've changed direction somewhat, and I think I'm more interested in Goldust now than I was before. Anyway, Hillbilly Jim is introduced as the special guest referee for the hog pen match. The hog pen is about the same size as a wrestling ring. It's probably about 20 feet up the R-way between the stage and the ring. It's about the same size. It's basically, a kind of a fence about the same size, height as wrestling ropes on the floor, and then it's just covered in slop with about half a dozen hogs inside of it, surrounded by a wooden fence. Hunter Hearst Helmsley looks appalled, revolted even. The match isn't starting in the pen itself, it seems, and they didn't bother to explain the rules of this until about 75% of the way through, but essentially the rules are very simple. You start in the ring, and the first person to put their opponent into the hog pen wins the match. It's Hunter Hearst Helmsley versus Henry O. Godwin with Hillbilly Jim as special guest referee in a hog pen match. Godwin ends up slopping a WWF announcer and some people in the crowd as Helmsley dives out of the way. Godwin grabs some slop and rubs it in Hunter's face, which pisses him off. Hunter hits a neck breaker before hitting a nice high knee. The hogs seem to have fallen asleep. Helmsley picks up Hunter and we get near the hog pen. Hunter whips Godwin into the fencing, sets up for the pedigree, but Godwin backdrops him onto the fence. Looks like went into the objectives. Yeah, they've got the rules in my notes here. Hunter drops an elbow from the fence and crawls back into the ring. We get back in the ring. Godwin hits a lovely reverse facebuster. The action slowly edges towards the pen with Godwin on offense. He goes for a reverse DDT, but Hunter slides out and Godwin hits the concrete hard. Hunter then gets slammed into the hog pen. Godwin goes for a reverse DDT called the slop drop and hits it. Godwin charges at Hunter, who flips him over the fence into the hog pen. Hunter wins the match. Hunter starts shoving Hillbilly Jim, who shoves him into Godwin, who body drops him right into the slop. The pigs, right on cue, are up and running around. Hunter gets a body slam for his troubles and then slips around in the slop for good measure. Craig?
This was, I really disliked this match. I think the Henry Godwin character's just plain stupid and looking increasingly dated, even though it's only a few months old, and the Triple H character is a sort of weak version of the sort of I'm wealthy character that $1 Million Man did very well during the 80s. So straight off the bat, I'm very uninterested in these two guys. Give them a cookie gimmick. Don't explain why. Have Hillbilly Jim as a special guest referee for absolutely no reason, and it's very difficult to expect anything other than utter nonsense in this match.
Chris?
Well, on paper, when you look at the match as an Arkansas hog pen match, and as Craig says, both guys you're not particularly invested in, I was expecting something terrible, but it was about 10 minutes long, and it didn't feel like a chore to sit through. I'm not saying I really enjoyed it. It felt fine. Like it had a lot of silly in it, but the action was okay. Hunter bumped about pretty viciously. He did a few corner flips, and when he got whipped into the gate around the hog pen, that looked pretty brutal, and he cut his back open quite badly. I didn't think the action was so bad. I didn't particularly enjoy this match. It just over-delivered, but probably because my expectations were so low, but I thought this was okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've come to this point a few times before on the show in saying that there are some matches where even though the gimmick seems really shit, if the alternative is just a bog standard singles match, I'd probably rather have the gimmick. Chris, I think you were on the show when we did the Dallas Page, Dave Sullivan arm wrestling match. I think you were on that one. And we were saying about, or maybe you weren't, how, they did an arm wrestling match. It wasn't particularly good. I remember saying, look, the alternative is these two wrestling. If I had the choice, I'd rather have them in the arm wrestling match because at least it'd be shorter. And as we found out the following month at Bash at the Beach, Dallas Page against Dave Sullivan was not a good wrestling match. In a similar kind of way, I don't know that there's a lot of interest in Hunter Hearst Helmsley versus Henry O. Godwin, but I think to your average viewer, and I think to a lot of people, you say, oh, it's a hog pen match. I'm a bit more intrigued. And that's fine, but that then relies on the gimmick to deliver. It just about did. I think this was slightly better than what their in-ring match would have been. The right guy went over, but we had a fun spot after the match where he got his comeuppance, if you like, getting put in the hog pen and getting thrown around and all of that. The pigs were brilliant in their role. They were asleep during the middle of the match, and then just as the match ends, they were up and around. I don't know what happened, but they hit their cue if nobody else did. And yeah, Craig, can we call it a bit of fun? Craig, would it have been better than these two having a match?
Yes.
That's my overriding point, I guess.
But my problem isn't with the gimmick match. It's the fact that it just got no introduction. There was no sort of, I guess you can't sort of describe it as one of the best, a match from wrestling history and like that. But I didn't know how you won it. Because it started in the ring and you've got a hog pen with some pigs, 50 yards away from the ring, and you're like, well, why? What's the point in this? But we didn't know. We didn't know until halfway through the match, and they're like, oh, guys, we meant to tell you, this is how you win this match. That's what just made it so rubbish and throwaway feeling.
Well, at least it's not like the Rest in Peace match a couple of years ago where they just never explained it.
No, it's fractionally better, but I remember us being particularly scathing about that. So, yeah, we can be fractionally less scathing about this match, but I mean, still, come on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was a 4 out of 10 when it could have been a 3 out of 10, I guess. As I say, like a lot of the stuff earlier on this show, I felt it could have been worse, and it went by quite quickly. We move on to Owen Hart with Jim Cornette against Diesel. Diesel versus Owen seems like a massive size mismatch. Diesel comes out of the blocks hard, hitting a sidewalk slam. Owen starts unloading on Diesel on the second rope, but Diesel just shoves him off and throws him over the top rope to the outside. Owen fires him off the ropes and hits a spinning heel kick, then hits a high angle drop kick from the top. Owen sets for some sort of leg drop, but Diesel fires him into the turnbuckle post, then does snake eyes. Diesel hits a big boot, then shouts, "This is for you, Sean," while hitting a jackknife. Diesel puts one foot on Owen to pin him, but decides against it too. Sets up for the jackknife again. This time shoves the referee. The referee awards a DQ, so Owen wins the match, but Diesel hits another powerbomb on Owen for good measure. Chris?
The match itself was effectively a glorified squash, although in the short while that Diesel was on the back foot, I did think he sold quite well when Owen was working the leg. But yeah, generally it was a very short match, but it was more about furthering this new sort of tweener Diesel character that we've seen since he's lost the title, and I think he's doing really well. It's the most I've been interested in Diesel all year, the whole year. There's a great babyface moment with him shouting, "This is for you, Sean," as you said, and then immediately after gets himself DQ'd with being a bit too overly aggressive, and it's intriguing, and it's the best Diesel's looked all year, and it's just, why couldn't have you booked him like this when he had the title? It's just frustrating. But generally, the match itself had very little noteworthy, but it did a good job of furthering this new Diesel character.
Greg?
Yeah, it's difficult to really add much more to it. My thoughts on it were definitely nothing much match, but it served the storyline purpose. If anything, it'd have been better for it not to have been Owen Hart wasted in this role. But yeah, it serves the storyline purpose. At least he's on the show. There is that, I suppose. I mean, he's a guy that could be used much better, but I appreciate that's something for definitely later on in the show. But yeah, Diesel is more interesting, so that sort of bodes well going into 1996.
Craig, one of the things we did Diesel for over an hour, I can't remember if we discussed it or not, but one of the things we kind of asked ourselves at points this year is, of the kind of heels coming into 95 that Diesel could have faced, Yokozuna, Bob Backlund, Owen Hart, whether those matchups would have been any good. Now, we know Diesel and Backlund wasn't any good because they tried that and they gave up on it. We saw a brief interaction between Diesel and Yokozuna on Raw, which while only lasting about 15 seconds was actually way more interesting than I ever would have given it credit for. Yokozuna was moving about as quickly as Yokozuna can, kind of bumping for Diesel. I thought it worked quite well. Was there anything you saw here that suggested Diesel versus Owen Hart could have been a main event matchup program 3 months ago?
I think there was some snippets that sort of made it look like the pair of them could have quite a good battle. Actually, I was quite sort of surprised more than anything to see sort of Owen knock Diesel off his feet for a start. So I think Owen would. It'd be a different sort of foil to the type that the WWF gave Diesel throughout his title run, the sort of lumbering big men. If he's going to be able to get a match with anyone and he can't get a match from Owen Hart, then you're probably struggling. But there was enough glimpses to suggest that maybe they did miss something by not putting them together when Diesel had the title.
Chris?
Yeah, I'd agree. And considering some of the opponents he had, I haven't been on too many WWF shows, but listening to the podcast, you can tell some of the pairings he's had with Sid and Mabel, the matches have just been awful. So you're definitely going to get a better match out of it. So why not do it? It's pro wrestling, you control it, it eventually headed into Survivor Series, could have potentially added more fuel to the fire in Diesel Bret, in that it adds the storyline dynamic that even Owen's getting a title shot before it gets around to Bret again, and you've got that sort of aspect that Bret can be frustrated about in the build and things like that. I don't see why they couldn't have pulled the trigger on this as a actual title match a few months ago, as you say. I think it would have been a perfectly acceptable pairing. It would have probably been a lot better than what we ended up with throughout the year.
Yeah, I don't know that you would have got 3 months out of Diesel and Owen Hart, and as I kind of put in my notes, there was, visibly it wasn't great, Owen the heel who's, over a foot shorter, but as a one-off match, I feel like you could have got away with that, and I think it would have been a lot better than what they did. But we are where we are. We get a promo from the $1 Million Man. He comes out while Savio Vega is handing out presents with Santa. Ted says Savio has a price and invites him into the ring and his fat dummy friend. Savio accuses the $1 Million Man of trying to destroy the magic of Santa Claus, but he does believe in Santa. Santa then hits Vega with his sack, lays him out with a clothesline. DiBiase has bought Santa Claus. Vega chases Santa up the aisleway and attacks him. Vega gets the wig off of Santa, but it's not immediately clear who it is. They do introduce him on Raw, but by the by. Chris, your standard hokey WWF Christmas fodder, I would call this.
Yeah, absolutely. But as far as fodder goes, I thought this was maybe because it's that time of year and everyone's in the Christmas spirit, but I didn't mind this segment. I thought it was quite amusing, that the idea that even Santa can be bought. I thought this, as far as those kind of throwaway fodder segments go, I thought this was fine.
Great.
It was harmless enough, and it's Christmas. There didn't need to be some sort of kooky Christmas thing, and I did find it quite amusing that after $1 Million Man saying everybody's got a price for the $1 Million Man, that indeed Santa does have a price.
We get a video package looking at Mabel, and we move on to King Mabel with Sir Mo versus The Undertaker with Paul Bearer in a casket match. Taker hits Mabel with a series of rights in the corner before hitting a running splash. Mabel hits the side slam, but Undertaker sits up. Mabel hits a clothesline, but Undertaker sits up. Mabel hits a body slam, and Undertaker cannot sit up this time. Mabel goes to the second rope, but Taker sits up, so he goes for a splash. Taker tries to take Mabel off of his feet, but Mo grabs his leg, and Mabel hits a belly-to-belly suplex off of the distraction before dropping a leg. Undertaker tries to sit up, but cannot, and eats a splash. The crowd start a large rest in peace chant. Undertaker gets dumped into the casket, but Mabel and Mo don't seem to have realised they need to close the lid. By the time they do, it's too late. Taker goes for a clothesline spot against again, flooring Mabel with a flying one. He then sets up and hits a fairly decent chokeslam, taking them big boots Mabel into the casket. Mo jumps in the ring and starts attacking him. Taker chokeslams Mo, puts him in the casket too, stands into the casket, grabs the gold chain, which was the urn before it was smelted down, off of Mo, closes the casket, the crowd pop big, and Undertaker wins the match. Undertaker hands the chain to Paul Bearer, then signals to the crowd that he wants the WWF Championship. Craig?
I think we know that this is the end of the Mabel experiment, so there's the sort of silver lining for him to sit through this. This was pretty poor. Mabel's just rubbish, and the Undertaker's nothing like good enough to be able to carry him to a good match. Mercifully, it was quite short. It ends the Mabel thing, and by the looks of things, Undertaker's going to be moving on to bigger and better things, so the end justifies the means.
Chris?
Yeah, as Craig said, it was crap, basically. There was nothing action-wise of note here. One thing that did annoy me, if Undertaker's moving on to challenge for the WWF title, and as Craig says, this is the end of sort of Mabel's experiment and Mabel's run, then the booking of having Mabel and Mo win the match but not really understand that they have to shut the coffin lid, the casket lid, is frustrating to me, because that doesn't help the Undertaker, and there's no need to help those two because you're not running forward with them anymore. That is a bit stupid, because they basically had that match won inside 4 minutes, and just like whether it's arrogance or not understanding the rules, they failed to shut the lid, and that sort of undermines the Undertaker having such a convincing 6-minute victory for that. That really was a massive negative on this for me, and the match itself wasn't great, so I wasn't a fan of this one at all.
Yeah, I know what you mean, Chris. I just think I don't get the sense your average viewer is probably going to be all that bothered by the fact that Undertaker was in the casket and they didn't try and win. They've done it before. We've had Sid powerbombing Diesel, then, standing around the ring for 15 seconds to pose before he goes to the pin, which is obviously, which is a way of them having Sid being able to do his finish on Diesel but not having him kick out. It looks a bit stupid. I guess it was the build to the hope spot was, we'll try and make Undertaker look in danger, and then, he'll fight out of it. I'll let them off it, I think. I don't think anyone's that bothered. As for the match, yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those things, like, it's not for the first time this year I've kind of gone with Mabel. I honestly thought it would be worse. I think given what the resources they had, I think they laid out a fairly solid match. Mabel tries to chop Undertaker down at the start, gets cut off, Mo gets involved, which means Undertaker can do some stuff. Undertaker gets on top, does the limited moves he can to Mabel, then Mo gets in the ring so he can hit his choke slam on him, and he puts him in the thing, and it's the decisive ending to the match. It's when I say it could have been worse, that's probably the best praise I can give it. But Craig, as you alluded to, the end of the Mabel experiment, and I don't think anyone other than Vince McMahon is really surprised.
No, I mean, you can sort of understand things when he picks these sort of super muscular guys, but it's just, there never seemed to be anything really redeeming about Men on a Mission at all, and the only thing of any interest is just the massive scale of Mabel, but I mean that doesn't sort of lend itself to stellar matches, particularly when you stick him in the ring with people like Diesel, etc., and the Undertaker. So no, really not a massive surprise that it's failed. Maybe the only actual surprise is how little time he really has given it, because it's only maybe 5 or 6 months, but we have covered previously the sort of injuries that he's caused by his clumsy and reckless wrestling in ring style. So yeah, maybe not massive surprise in the end.
Yeah, in a perverse way, I'd kind of be intrigued to see what Bret or Shawn could get out of Mabel. What kind of match they could construct. I mean, I'm not saying that's the answer to anything, but I think I'd be morbidly intrigued in a weird kind of way. But yeah, no, it's they gave him the title match. It stunk up the joint. They gave him King of the Ring. It stunk up the joint. I'm sort of surprised, because that's the thing, I think they'd given up on Mabel after the SummerSlam match. I'm sort of surprised they went this way, other than the fact that maybe they just went, well, we need a program for Undertaker, he's got some momentum this year, I guess, if you want to call it that. But Craig, it's Mabel and Mo is a tag team act. It's the gigantic big guy who can't move a lot, but we can put him with a slightly smaller guy who can do most of the heavy lifting. He comes in the ring, does a few sharp moves, and wins the match. They've taken a quite old school, old style tag team act, and they turned it into the singles act, and they picked the wrong guy.
Yeah, quite probably, but I think Vince would have likely just been blown away by Mabel's massive stature. I don't just mean sort of girth, I do mean sort of his height as well. But yeah, you're right. Working in a tag team, they were able to sort of cover his flaws, have him come in and do the big finish. But in one-on-one matches, I mean, when they were in tag matches, he wasn't in the ring for that long. So to expect Mabel to transition from that to being able to be in a one-on-one match for any sort of length of time just seems strange. Bizarre that they thought it could work, frankly.
Chris, any more thoughts on Mabel?
No, I mean, I haven't seen as much of him as either of you, but it's absolutely no surprise to me, having seen a small amount of him, that it didn't work, and having listened back to a lot of the shows from this year, particularly the King of the Ring, it's a surprise that he's still on a pay-per-view in December.
Hi fans, you see a very joyful reunion in the ring, but for some reason I don't think we're going to see that right here tonight. I'm joined now, ladies and gentlemen, by Jim Cornette, Mr. and Mrs. Davey Boy Smith. This is going to be a classic.
Bret Hart, you've been jealous of this man since the first day you laid eyes on him in 1981. Calgary Stampede Wrestling, he came in, a fresh-faced hotshot kid from England. He stole your thunder, he stole your fans, he stole your father, Stu Hart's respect. When Stu Hart came up and patted him on the back and said, Davey, you're just like a son to me, and stuck a knife in your guts, punk. Then your sister fell in love with him and decided to get married. She used to be thinking that you were her hero, but all of a sudden she had a new hero, Bret. Then he took your Intercontinental title. Tonight, he's going to make it a clean sweep. He's going to give that knife another twist, punk. And Bret Hart, you're going down at the hands of the man you've never beaten, the British Bulldog.
Diana, here at the holiday season, though, in 1992, you had some mixed emotions. Do you have any mixed emotions right now?
Oh, no, none at all. I have complete faith in my husband, Davey, and I believe since he's beat Bret twice already, he'll beat him again tonight.
All right, Davey, any last-minute thoughts?
Bret, I beat you 1992, Wembley Stadium for the Intercontinental title. Tonight, in your house, I'm going to win the World Wrestling Federation title and put it around the British Bulldog's waist, where it rightfully belongs.
Jim Ross takes us back to Wembley Stadium in 1992 with where Bulldog defeated Bret. He's then joined by Cornette, Davey Boy and his wife. Cornette says that Diana grew up thinking Bret was her hero, but now she's got a new hero. Diana says Bulldog has beaten Bret before and he can win tonight. Craig, nice little effective pre-match segment this.
I did like it, and it was a bit different because when it comes to sort of hyping things, the WWF tend not to go that far back. Like, when they're talking about Diesel, they go back as far back as him beating Bob Backlund in '94, which for the WWF seems a long time. So to hark back to an event in 1992 just it made it feel a little bit different and look a bit more special. And the family stuff's pretty straightforward and easy, but it's very effective when it comes to the Harts, as we've seen before.
And more pertinent when you talk about them not hyping back very far. And that you think about it, if you wanted to hype Diesel, you'd probably go back to the Rumble 94 and to Survivor Series 94 if you really wanted to hype him. And they haven't done that much. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I feel this segment was really good. For a main event on and in your house, it's as intriguing as most of the main events we've seen, with the exception of maybe Survivor Series. But throughout the whole year, basically, I thought this was a good way to hype up the match, and it definitely had me more invested in what we're about to see.
Craig, who's the better promo, Bulldog or Diana?
It's close. Probably Diana just edges it.
Chris?
Probably Diana.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Bulldog wins on the physique, though.
Depends what you're looking for. Different kind of question. Move on. It's time for the main event. It's Davey Boy Smith with Diana Smith and Jim Cornette versus Bret Hart for the WWF Championship. Bulldog, apparently, according to Lawler, is wearing the same Union Jack tights from 1992. They're the same looking. I just don't know whether Lawler was insinuating they were the same pair. Bret does a takedown and gets in an armbar on Bulldog. Bulldog flicks out of it into one of his own. Cornette's second tennis racket has a Santa Claus cover on it. Bret goes for a crossbody block for a 2, then hits an atomic drop. Bulldog gains control with a running knee and a tree of woe. He kicks Bret, but then levels Earl Hebner, who's quickly up, suggesting it may have been an accident. There's some sort of commotion in the crowd, with some sort of security official confiscating a sign or two, opposite the hard camera really. The crowd start an ECW chant. Bret goes for a crucifix, but Bulldog just drops him. They say on commentary that Undertaker will be facing the winner of this match. Vince then corrects himself and says the WWF champion, obviously after what happened a couple of months ago. Cornette then nails Bret with his tennis racket. Bulldog does some shoulder charges and then fires Bret Hart into the turnbuckle. Bulldog locks in a long headlock. Bret gets back into it with an atomic drop before hitting a running Bulldog, then hits a pile driver. Bret hits a leg sweep, then drops an elbow from the second rope. Bret goes for a superplex from the top. Bulldog dumps him onto the top rope, sending him to the outside. Bulldog picks up Bret, drives him into the ring steps before doing the same to the ring post. Bret is gushing blood at this point, and there is an audible "He's hardcore" chant from people in the floor section. Back in the ring, Bulldog fires him off the turnbuckle for hitting a pile driver. Vince orders the camera to stick to the wide shots, quote, "We do not need any close-ups of what's going on." Bulldog does a diving headbutt to Bret's side, who's laying face down. Bulldog puts Bret in a bow and arrow. Bret escapes and tries to lock in a sharpshooter, which the crowd explode for, but Bulldog wriggles free. Bret fires Bulldog off the ropes. Bulldog nails Bret with a shoulder tackle and goes flying across the ring to the outside. Back in the ring, Bret hits a snap German suplex and nearly takes it. We get a double clothesline spot, both down in the ring. Bret then vaults Bulldog to the outside before hitting a crossbody and unloading on him with some rights. Bret climbs to the top, a second rope, throws himself in Bulldog's direction on the floor. Bulldog catches him on the shoulder and hits a lovely running power slam. Bulldog pulls up the matting at ringside. Bret blocks the suplex and dumps Bulldog onto the guardrail before clotheslining him off. Bret hits a backbreaker. He slings Bulldog into the corner. Bulldog flips over when he hits it, bounces off the turnbuckle, then lands almost directly on his head and shoulder, which didn't look fun at all. Bret lands a superplex. Bulldog barely kicks out. Bulldog rolls up Bret. Bret rolls through for a near fall. Bret then hits a Madison-style cradle and gets the 3. Chris.
This was very much a match of two halves for me. The ECW chants within the first few minutes, they were reflective of quite a slow, mundane start. It felt, to a certain extent, like both guys were going through the motions. There was a lot of chin locks, and it didn't necessarily feel like sometimes with title matches, they're building towards a bigger finish. I didn't really get that vibe. I just thought it was at a leisurely pace. I wasn't too interested. But then the match took a turn. As soon as the action spills to the outside and Bret gets busted open, the match really turns into something wonderful. And it felt like Dave stepped it up with his aggression, and it felt like there was a real, like, the way Bret was selling and whatnot. Bret seemed like he was in a lot of trouble, and it looked pretty hopeless for him, and the aggression and the blood, they sort of added together, and there were some really, really nice spots throughout this period of the match, and it built to a really wonderful, it culminated in basically a really wonderful match. The finish was slightly out of nowhere, not necessarily in a good way. It did feel, I'm not going to say rushed because it was quite a long match, but the finish did seem to just suddenly happen. I wasn't expecting it to come quite when it did, but I have to say I really enjoyed this overall.
Chris, does Bret need an impact finisher?
Yes, it would certainly help. I think it would be a benefit to not only him, but sort of the matches he's capable of putting on if he had something to build to. Although, obviously the sharpshooter, but it's perfectly fine, but it depends. If you don't want to end every match by submission, then you have to have a second way to get out of it.
Craig, same question?
Probably. It would also add a little bit of variety to his matches rather than just waiting for his 5 or 6 moves of doom that he does in order to finish matches off. It's difficult to sort of work out what it could be though. But yeah, there probably should be. It'd probably be beneficial to him to have another string to his bow.
Well, yeah, literally with the bow and arrow. I think in terms of him, we saw the King of the Ring victory 2 years ago where he won 3 different matches with 3 different moves. I think one of them was the sharpshooter, but the other 2 weren't. I know in the final he beat Bam Bigelow with a victory roll. But it's, you can't have your number one babyface tapping out all of your heels because you won't have many heels left in 6 months' time. Not that they've got a lot anyway. This is the alternative. And I think in a match last month against Diesel, it was really effective because it played in a lot into, Diesel's insecurities and his kind of the evolution of his character in that with the Diesel of 1994 have given Bret a chance to get up, and so Bret was able to snap him into a quick inside cradle for the win. Here it just felt like this was a match that needed a decisive clean finish, and not that it wasn't decisive, but you kind of associate a cradle or a roll up or a small package with an unconvincing finish. So I don't know. I agree with Craig. I don't know what it would be. Craig, your thoughts on this match?
It's really quite difficult to add much that Chris hadn't touched upon. It was a sort of match of 2 halves. And the finish was bizarre because, as is alluded to, it did just seem like the slowness, certainly at the start, was building up to something, and then it was just a pinfall out of nowhere. You sort of came away from this match being impressed by it, particularly the section after Hart's bloodied, and it becomes a little bit, I guess, becomes a wee bit more violent, to be honest. But you're left with a lot of questions as well as enjoying it, like why that finish? Why was it so quick? It just seems a little bit strange. But yeah, a very good match. All in all, as I said right at the start of my review, that and the opening encounter were the 2 really standout matches in the show for me.
I thought this was really, really good. In terms of, it was slow at the start, but long matches are kind of meant to be slow at the start, I think, to a point. I know I probably criticised last month for starting off a bit sluggishly, but as you'll hear in that review, there were reasons for me saying that, in that it should have tied into the storyline more that Diesel was trying to get the match finished early. That was so much the case here, and I think they built through it nicely. I would completely agree with the sentiment that Chris made that once Bret started bleeding, and it was weird because, he cut himself, but he hit the steps, there's a bit of cover, but Davey rams him into the ring step, and then Bret head goes down. He's gushing blood already. It was a very effective visual, and we talk about WWF cutting back. The one real benefit of that is that when you do it, it means a lot more. And it was in front of a crowd, I'm not saying they all watch ECW, but certain sections of the fan base clearly do in that arena. And so that tied into it as well. And the match got really good, I'm glad Davey's alright when he landed on his head, but now that he is, I can say that actually added a bit to the match, even though it's probably not a great spot for a guy of his size to be doing, flinging himself across the ring, flipping over onto his head and then trying to, correctly land the bump, having cannoned off with the turnbuckle. But the match got really good down the stretch. As I say, the slight disappointment probably was, and we can talk about Bulldog in a minute, slight disappointment probably was that Bret didn't win the match more decisively. And it's a weird criticism given all the, odd finishes we've had from both companies this year. But I would have liked to have seen something more decisive. Bret ends the year on a high note, and we transition forward. Craig, I'll save Chris this question because he probably hasn't seen enough to properly judge this. Where does this match stand amongst the best WWF matches of 1995?
It has to be right up there. Definitely right up there. I'd say it's maybe top 3, top 5 sort of area. It's difficult to think of. I mean, it's without doubt Bret Hart's best match. I'm sure we can agree on that, but he has been lumbered with some nonsense throughout the year. But yeah, without doubt one of the best matches. And I think this show's one of the best shows from the year as well. So all in all, very good.
Yeah, I mean, I'll save part of my rationale for Volume 6 when we do our end of year awards, but yeah, you're right. I think, I wouldn't undercut Bret Hart, Hakushi, Bret Hart, Jean-Pierre Lafitte in terms of very good Bret Hart matches this year, but in terms of a Bret Hart match had a lot of meaning and had a lot of build. Lest we not forget Bret Hart and Jean-Pierre Lafitte were fighting over the fact that Jean-Pierre Lafitte had stolen his jacket. That's there, that happened. And not that Hakushi was much more other than the bit with Bret Hart's severed head, which was just a bit weird. But in terms of meaningful Bret Hart matches, and that shrinks the pool right down probably to about 3 matches anyway. This was the best, and in terms of best WWF matches in 1995, it's probably this or the ladder match, and then you're into exciting matches that didn't really mean all that much. You're into Bret and Jean-Pierre Lafitte. I suppose Shawn Michaels did defeat Jeff Jarrett for the IC title. That was a very good match as well. But yeah, I mean, if we're making a composite card of best WWF match of the year, this probably headlines that show, in part because Shawn and Razor was second from the top at SummerSlam. But yeah, I think a really fun match. Craig, as for Davey Boy, I mean, I like the heel turn. I mean, they're talking about apparently, potentially turning him back babyface, or maybe I may be misquoting what I read in the Observer. Maybe more just the speculation from Dave Meltzer that they may now that he's served his purpose as a heel, they may move him back. But I given how thin they are on the heel side, I'd be inclined to leave him there, and I hope he doesn't fall the same way in 1996 that Yokozuna and Bob Backlund fell in 1995.
I think turning them babyface again would be a massive mistake. As we were saying at the beginning, quite a tongue-in-cheek fashion, when we were discussing who cut the better promo, him or Diane, I mean, it just shows that he is not that good a talker, so would benefit greatly from remaining under the tutelage of Jim Cornette, and there doesn't seem to be many babyface managers anyway, so you wouldn't want him sort of being on his own, because you can't envisage him doing much in the way of much of a meaningful contribution towards the top end of the card if he's not really able to cut a promo, which he's not. So no, I think turning him heel would be I think turning away from being a heel would be a mistake. I'd much rather see him remain working with Cornette, and he could be quite a credible upper carder.
Oh yes, over and over again, the fans of the World Wrestling Federation have asked, when is The Undertaker going to get a championship match? Thank you, Mr. Monsoon! It's going to come true! Oh, yes!
The WWF Royal Rumble is where it's going to happen. Stand by just 1 second.
What the hell's going on around here? Hey, because you beat Mabel, you're all of a sudden the #1 contender? What's going on? Hey, it's my title shot next. Big Daddy Cool, you haven't been very cool lately. In fact, you've lost your cool. Go, man, if I want. You know what? It seems to me people have been dodging me around here lately.
I don't dodge anybody.
So this is the way it's going to be, huh?
If it's gotta be, it has to be.
We end the show backstage with Paul Bearer and Undertaker with Tom Pettengill. Diesel walks in on the interview and says it's his title shot next. Diesel puts his hands on Bearer. Undertaker squares up to Diesel, and that's how we go off the air. Chris, I was giddy with excitement for this, on about 4 different levels. Diesel's finally got an interesting program with a guy that matters. Undertaker's finally got an interesting program with a guy that matters. And the stare-off was a really strong visual.
Yeah, this was a brilliant way to end the show, but it just adds more frustration with how Diesel's title reign went. Because we saw that interesting character culminate in an enjoyable sort of glorified squash match almost, but certainly him and Owen Hart, as we alluded to earlier, could have had a title match somewhere down the line. And then you look at him and Taker having this stare-off, and again, he's being put in situations that are so superior to how he was treated during his title reign. You feel sorry for the guy, and obviously he's making it work now. He's making the most of what he's doing now, but it all feels a little bit too late to me.
Craig.
Yeah, it's sort of reasons for sort of hope with the meaningful programs. Again, I go back to the idea that they might just blow it, but for the first time in 1995, you have got a sort of reason to be slightly optimistic.
Yeah. Like a lot of things, they may well blow it, but yeah, you're right. I'm at least interested on the way in rather than kind of hedging my bets on the way in. I'm actually intrigued, and I'll be disappointed if they do get it wrong. Chris, your overall thoughts on this show and a score rating out of 10?
I generally enjoyed this show, with the exception of the casket match, which I didn't whatsoever. The Buddy Landell Ahmed Johnson match is barely worth taking into account. And the Arkansas Hogpen match, again, as I said earlier, it exceeded my expectations because they were pretty terrible. So generally, from top to bottom, obviously the main event was great and the opening to the night was very good as well. So I would give this a 7 out of 10. I thought this was one of the better shows I've seen this year.
Greg?
For me, the opening match was great. The main event was absolutely fantastic. The stuff in the middle you could largely miss, but despite that, I'd still give this. I was going to say maybe 6 or 7 out of 10. I'm probably likely maybe move it nearer to 6 after the discussion, but still one of the better shows of the year.
Yeah, I'll split the difference and say 6.5. The everything before the main event, as I said at the start, nothing massively important really happened before the main event. The Ahmed Johnson Jarrett angle could have been something excellent, and then Johnson got up, but their intentions were good. There were other noteworthy things, but it went by quite quickly. There was nothing offensive. Even the casket match, you know what you're getting on the way in. It was fine. And the main event brings this show up by 2 or 3 points because it was that good. So I'll give it a 6.5 out of 10. We open up Raw on December 18th with the final Raw of the year, at least in the US, with there being no episode on Christmas Day, with Jeff Jarrett against Fatu. Fatu mocks Jarrett's strut, but the match ended in interference when Ahmed Johnson came out and attacked Double J. Jarrett legged it and Johnson tended to Fatu, who had sustained a shoulder injury. Gorilla Monsoon reveals that Double J threw his hat into the ring for the Royal Rumble. He's now throwing it out. Jarrett instead will face Ahmed Johnson at the pay-per-view. Goldust says he's watching Razor's every move, and now there's a special bond between the two of them. Razor claims he oozes machismo, while Chico let's ooze it together. You can buy the latest WWF video game for just $69.99, says Doc Hendricks. Buddy Landell defeats Bob Holly. Out with Brother Love, Ted DiBiase says the man who attacked Savio Vega last night wasn't Santa Claus, it was Xanta Claus. He's the newest member of the $1 Million Corporation. He then says 1996 will be the year of the $1 Million Champion because everyone has a prize for the $1 Million Corporation. Goldust is sat in the R-Way for the Intercontinental title match between Razor Ramon and Yokozuna. Razor goes to set off his pyro, but instead gets greeted by Goldust's golden confetti. Undertaker comes out during the match. As the lights start pulsing, Yokozuna legs it with the casket present at ringside. Ramon wins by countout. Razor afterwards says Goldust can do his thing, just not with him. He says the content of the letter wasn't for airing on television, and we go off the air with Shawn Michaels' video package backed by a power ballad. But we do get Raw on Christmas Day here in the UK. A half an hour look at the story of the WWF title, starting with Diesel's title win over Bob Backlund. At one point, Todd Pettengill on narration said Diesel did his best to conform to the corporate image, never realising it was softening the aggressive edge that propelled him to the top. I'm sure he was completely unaware. Kurt Hennig in the studio says it's obvious the suits were in his ear. Vince McMahon says we can very well see a far more aggressive Diesel in 1996. The rest of the show builds up champion Bret and number one contender Undertaker. They also take a look at some of the contenders for the Royal Rumble. An interesting list of people they perceive to be near the title picture. We get video packages for Razor Ramon, Ahmed Johnson and Yokozuna. Vince says 1996 will be the most competitive year in the history of the World Wrestling Federation title. The show ends with the Shawn Michaels video package from last week.
You know, Monsoon, I gotta give it to you. The lobotomy scar, hardly noticeable. The only way I'm not the number one contender. But you know what? Merely a technicality. Because in the Royal Rumble, Big Daddy Cool's gonna do what he does best. Everybody goes over the top rope. And you know what? That's right. Anaheim, WrestleMania. I get back what's mine. The World Wrestling Federation title. That's right.
So we come out of the pay-per-view, and we'll start with discussing, well, the Christmas Day edition of Raw. One didn't actually air in the US, at least. They aired it about 3 days later on Thursdays. But because they're cancelling their Thursday night viewing, they didn't promote it, and they haven't been because they don't want to draw away from their Monday night audience. So I don't think many people saw it, but it did air elsewhere. We did get to see it. There was no matches. It was a studio segment. They'd done these things before. I think last year before WrestleMania, they just had Lauder and Vince in a studio previewing things. Predominantly looking at Diesel's title run, and building things into 96, looking at the Diesel, Bret, Undertaker triangle, if you like, and some of the other contenders. Craig, one of the big stories, I guess, is the bit about Diesel. Let me just pull up this quote, if I've got it, from the show. Where are we saying? Yeah, here we go. So Todd Pettengill on narrating a package about Diesel's run in the year said, quote, Diesel did his best to conform to the corporate image, never realising it was softening the aggressive edge that propelled him to the top. Now, Craig, me and you did an hour with Kieran last month talking about Diesel. But yeah, quite interesting to try and imply that Diesel the character try and imply that Diesel the character didn't know it was affecting his edge, which makes sense in storyline, but it also implies that nobody else saw that in real life.
It's interesting. It's total revisionism, but it is very interesting that they're trying to blame it on him being a corporate man. I guess it makes sense because it allows them to have another go at it, and if they can use him differently, it could be more successful. But it does seem a little bit like they're making things up to cover for whatever the reasons were for Diesel's failings as champion.
Chris?
Just from a storyline perspective, it makes perfect sense in that it gives the character Diesel a second wind in terms of running with this new character. It gives an explanation for the sudden sort of change of heart, and it gives an explanation for why his title run didn't quite go to plan. It makes perfect sense in that from a storyline perspective, but as we know in reality, as Craig said, it is very revisionist and doesn't quite fit what actually happened.
Yeah, and the fact that if you listen to the promo he cut a couple of days later after he won the title that we played on last month's show, obviously from November 94, it clearly had already started affecting him, which I don't know. And I know he said in the promo on Raw last month that they sat me down after I won the title, but it's hard to imagine it would have had such a big impact so early on. I guess there's plausible deniability on their side in terms of how they told the story. Chris, what do you think of the rest of the show? I quite liked it. I think that this is the kind of thing that, alright, I don't think you want to do so obtusely that often, but this kind of little extended, pre-tape, setting the scene for the title picture, explaining the stories, previewing things, I think is mighty effective when the rest of the year it's all matches and angles on TV. I think this, while it was significantly different, really stood out.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I'm a massive fan of shows like this, when regular episodes of Raw, you're not going to get that. I really enjoy it. Like you say, though, I wouldn't do it too often because it will water it down a bit, but I'd rather see a show like this that lays out the entire title landscape from top to bottom, looks at all the contenders, looks at the former champion and the current champion, explains sort of how we got to this stage where we are and looking forward to what we have to come from all the players involved. It does a lot for everyone involved, more than sort of promos that can be hit or miss, or matches or angles, and trying to fit all of those in for all the different players. Having a 20-minute show like this achieves so much more for everyone who was mentioned within the episode than a regular episode of Raw, you have to imagine, wouldn't have been able to do it as well.
Craig, power balance, retirement talk, what do you think of what they're doing with Shawn Michaels at the moment?
I guess it's, with him being out injured, it's the easiest way to keep him on screen and in our attentions. It is quite sort of interesting on one level. We touched upon the sort of idea of playing it too real as though he was seriously injured last week, but I guess they know that he is the Great White Hope for the company, so do need to keep him in our minds.
Yeah, I think in terms of what could Shawn Michaels have been doing had he been around this month? Given, Shawn probably would have appeared on the pay-per-view, I would think, but given that they had enough going on with the Diesel change of plan, with, Bret in the main event, with what they're doing on Undertaker, it didn't harm things to have Shawn off screen. It means people miss him more and they're building up the suspense over the future of his career. I don't necessarily love, as I said last month, I don't necessarily love the whole, he might have post-concussion syndrome. That's not the thing you want to be saying on your own TV programming. But the way they've told the story, it's going to mean more when he comes back. And he's a guy that they need to be looking at for 1996, and we'll be discussing that in our end of year review. Right, we are going to move on to some quick fire topics before we finish with, nothing significant enough to do a long drawn out conversation, because we've got a jam in the end of year taping at the end of this recording session as well. We're a bit pressed for time. Craig, we will start with the story about Ultimate Warrior. There were 3 points in the news, and I'll dig up and find them now. Where are we? Yeah. Some misgivings in the locker room about how much he would cost, his attitude, and whether he could pass WWF's new stringent drug testing policies. I will add a fourth to that, Craig, which would it be worth it? What do you think?
I guess it's just the Vince just being really desperate and realising that there's really only so many names out there that still have any value, and just, I guess the fact that Warriors build, there's always going to be a liking from Vince towards that. I don't think it would be worth the money, and I certainly don't think it'd be worth the risk, but it is just a sort of act of desperation on Vince's part to get some sort of name value brought in for next month's Rumble.
Yeah, at a time when money isn't great, when buy rates aren't great, when you're being hammered at all sides, I don't know I'd be putting a lot of my eggs in Warriors' basket, but, as you say, they are getting, chipped at by WCW. Warrior, because they own the rights to the gimmick, isn't something WCW can recreate. Hey, go back and listen to our stuff on the Renegade they tried. They can't bring him in with the name because WWF own it, so they can't market him that way. It's a pop. It's a pop, but I don't know that I want to be signing him on a big long contract, because I think the law of returns will diminish quite quickly. And the fact that, I kind of feel we've moved on from Warrior. I kind of feel like that era's been and gone. In the post-steroid trial era, he would be out of place and not in a good way. And for everything else, I just don't know that it's worth it long term. Chris, down 7.
Yeah, in terms of a potential name you bring it in, for us doing the UFC show, it certainly caught my attention and really stood out to me, perhaps more than any other name, just because of the recent success. And you'll be able to hear that in the UFC volume for this month, with him going all the way in that tournament. And he's obviously like that, the UFC, for as underground as they are, they do well in terms of pay-per-view buys and things like that. So if they were able to get Dan 7 and he was able to bring a small corner of that market across, and maybe people who are interested in more sort of ultimate fighting, and you could promote him as a shoot fighter, and I don't know, I'd really like to see it, but in terms of how likely it is to happen, I struggle to see that happen. We know he's going to be moving on to super fights and whatnot with the UFC, and it doesn't seem like the UFC or WWF would. It doesn't seem like he could do both. I have no reason to, no evidence for that, but in my head, him doing both at the same time doesn't really work. So, I mean, I don't have particular hopes for it, but I'd definitely like to see it.
Yeah, to fill in those who don't know, Dan Severn is, doing Ultimate Fighting, mixed martial arts for UFC, but he does also wrestle. He's also, NWA champion material. So it's not a celebrity in that sense. It's just a guy that happens to have a wrestler that happens to have notoriety outside of it. But Chris, I don't know that they'd be willing to go far enough to entertain and properly promote what UFC is to be able to get Dan Severn over. And I think the only people that really look at Dan Severn as a big attraction know that he's legitimately tough. And when he doesn't win, I think it will just look a bit weird. But Chris, I think there's a bigger point here, which is if I'm UFC and I've got media issues surrounding whether we're legitimate or not, the last thing I want is the guy who just won my Ultimate tournament rocking up in the WWF.
Oh yeah, well there you go. That's what when I said I sort of couldn't put my finger on why they wouldn't want to have someone do both. That sums it up. Yeah, they're really struggling at the moment, the UFC, in terms of their media coverage. In both that people call it fake and that people say it's way too over the top and too brutal. So, I mean, I guess no publicity is bad publicity, but in the same way, when you're trying to promote yourselves as a legitimate mixed martial arts enterprise, having someone turn up in the WWF isn't really what you want to happen.
Craig, Terry Funk.
I guess it's something a wee bit different and sort of indicates a sort of change in direction, again, considering how, when it comes to his recent activities, but it's just, how much name value does Terry Funk really have in 1995 beyond the core audience? I appreciate there's not a million guys out there.
And more pertinently, if this was WCW, I think it'd be a little bit different, but more pertinently in front of an audience that doesn't really know who he is beyond, as you say, the core guys that already do, and in which case I don't think it'd make a difference.
No, exactly. I mean, he had a fleeting run with the company in the 80s, but I mean, he wasn't like a big name guy then. I mean, really, in terms of WWF, someone like King Kong Bundy was a bigger name in the 80s, and the experiment with him returning didn't work out, so I don't see how they'd get any better results from someone like Terry Funk, who was lower down on the same WWF cards that King Kong Bundy was on in the 80s.
Chris, what about Vader? If he's available, and as we said, I don't know who he is, that's the one name that really intrigues me.
If he's available and healthy, as we spoke about in the news, he has a surgery scheduled, then he would be a massive acquisition for the WWF. He's one of the names that probably the biggest name in pro wrestling that would be clearly available to them, that would have an obvious amount to offer them, and you could do a lot with him. And as we've spoken about, and you've spoken about on the last few months of WWF shows, they did struggle for top level heels, and he's someone who could be your number one heel for a long time, if you manage to bring him in. So that's definitely an exciting prospect.
Yeah, I think in terms of, they don't have many heels. We're talking about Bret Hart probably passing the belt to Shawn Michaels, both as baby faces in 1996. Vader can come in, and while they sort their shit out on the heel side, he could, if his shoulder is in decent enough nick, he could prop up that end while they get their house in order on the heel side. And as much as I say about Terry Funk, do people know who he is? I think with Vader, even if you don't, someone comes out there of that size and does a moonsault, you sit up and take notice. It's just providing they don't Bam Bam Bigelow him, because Bam Bam Bigelow was a similar size and can do a moonsault, and they got him in a main event position and then just didn't do anything with him. Yeah. Craig, one final name to finish off, Jake Roberts.
Now there's someone with name value, and well documented problems, but name value. I think he would attract back a lot of the fans that have maybe drifted away from the product. A lot out of curiosity, no doubt, but I think he would be a big draw. I think out of the names I've listed, in terms of weighing up risk and value, I think Vader's probably the one that's going to be the most valuable with the least risk attached to it. But Jake Roberts has got to be right up there in terms of name recognition and probably still able to put together a really good match, considering his matches tended to be more about psychology than anything else.
And that will wrap up this month's show even. I'd like to thank Chris White. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
Chris, tell people where they can find you on Twitter and about your podcast.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at ChrisWhite14. I do a wrestling podcast out of 20 years ago mode, out of the time machine. It's called Podplexity. You can find that on iTunes and SoundCloud, and that's also on Twitter at Podplexity. So if you're into your modern day stuff, please do check it out.
And Craig Wilson?
You can find me writing on the World of Wrestling, again with a sort of vintagey slant, at ringthedamnbell.wordpress.com.
Excellent, thank you very much. Yes, I will keep this wrap up very brief. 6 volumes, WWF, WCW 1, ECW 3, UFC 4, End of Year Review 5, End of Year Award 6. Plenty of stuff to get into. Wrestling 20 YRS on Twitter, Facebook.com. Email subscriptions are on the website, as everything's on the website. RSS feed, iTunes, all that stuff. And that's about it. I've been Bob Bamber. This has been the December 1995 WWF edition of the Wrestling 20 Years Ago podcast. And until next time, goodbye.